Hey everybody, it is late at night and I am Norman. There are two kinds of watches that I love: dress watches and field watches. I personally own a few A11 homages, a CWC Sapphire, and a Smith's PRS 29A. I've also owned a Hamilton Khaki Field. In reviewing and discussing these watches, I've received many suggestions for other field watches for me to look into. So let's look at those. I don't know exactly what it is about the field watch aesthetic that intrigues me so much. Perhaps it's their purpose. These watches are built to go into the darkest corners of humanity. They have to be able to withstand anything from trench to urban warfare. And most of us watch nerds are very familiar with the Pulp Fiction watch and ponder what its meaning in the movie might have been. I recently saw a part of the movie Fury where an SS officer was murdered and the only thing that was taken from his body was his watch. I think for me, personally, it goes back to my childhood where a close friend of mine had a field watch. I believe this was a long time ago. And somehow that aesthetic has really stuck to me. So when I saw other field watches, I subconsciously remembered that watch and all the nostalgia that went along with it. And now I've met an amazing individual, Mr. D, who is obsessed with watches of war and can tell you anything about any of them. And trust me, I'll be picking his brain for future videos. Whatever the reason for your interest in these amazing pieces of horological history and design, let's take a look at some modern field watches that you might not be aware of. Before we begin, for reference, this is a CWC G10, because I'll be mentioning it a few times. So when you hear that name, you know what I'm talking about. The first watch on my list is the Timor Field Heritage, which retails for about $1,100. During World War II, the British approved 12 brands as suppliers of watches to their troops. The watches had to be tough enough to handle war and accurate enough to allow troops to remain in sync with one another. One of these brands that were included in what would come to be known as the Dirty Dozen was Timur. Timur Heritage Field WWW capitalizes on this history, and it does so absolutely brilliantly. This is a bead-blasted watch with a vintage proportioned case. It features faux patinaed lume, a sub-seconds complication, and a 100% field watch style dial. It has a very similar dial aesthetic to the pieces that CWC puts out. The price is a lot higher than field watches typically go for. Usually, field watches are actually somewhat affordable. Most fall in at around $300 to $400. I absolutely love the look of these watches, and you can purchase them as automatic or manual wind pieces, which is something that's actually pretty rare. And these watches are no joke on eBay. Most of them hold their value really well. You're not going to be finding these for bargain prices there. As for the specifications on these watches, the case size is 36.5 millimeters, the case height is 11 millimeters, the case material is 316L stainless steel, the lug width is 18 millimeters, the lug to lug is 45.5 millimeters, the crystal is sapphire, the water resistance is 50 meters, the movements that you can choose from is either a Sellita SW260 or an SW216. Be sure to check out the description below because I've included a link to this and the other watches that we're discussing there. Next up on my list is a Citizen watch, the Citizen ProMaster Tough Super Titanium BN0118-04E. These retail for $370. This Citizen watch is very interesting. It looks nothing like most Citizen watches. It features oversized Arabic numerals with the triangle at the 12 o'clock and thick batten markers at 3, obscured by a date window, 6, and 9. The minutes hand is pencil shaped and the hour hand has an arrow at the end of it. Its crown is very knurled and reminds me of the crowns that you get on marathon watches. I still can't believe that this is a Citizen watch. It's an eco drive, so you'll likely have to have its gaskets checked for water resistance before you have to worry about replacing the capacitor in it. Just like the previous watch, these kind of remind me of the CWC G10 due to their dial and case shape. Unlike the CWC, these watches are housed within titanium cases, so they will likely be very lightweight watches. And this is somewhat of a double-edged sword because some watches can tend to feel kind of plasticky. What really stands out about these watches is their water resistance. Field watches are generally not known for having great water resistance ratings. The CWC G10 Sapphire had the deepest rating that I had encountered up until this point, at 200 meters. But these watches actually boast 300 meters of water resistance. That is a rating on par with dive watches. You can truly wear these watches every day and everywhere. I've personally owned a couple of EcoDrive Citizen watches and they were amazing. They were just always running. As for the specifications on these watches, the case size is 40 millimeters, the case height is 11 millimeters, the case material is titanium, the crystal is sapphire, the water resistance is 300 meters, and the movement inside is a Citizen EcoDrive. Next up we have the Hamilton Khaki Mechanical Pilot Pioneer, the H764-19931. And these retail for about $850. The Pilot Pioneer is an interesting watch. It looks like a field watch, but it is modeled after a watch that was issued to the British Royal Air Force in 1973, according to Hamilton's website. This is just one of many variations you will find online when looking for Hamilton Pilot Pioneer. You'll also find great-looking chronographs and even a super compressor style watch. I feel like the brand might be fishing a little bit with this line. The piece we're discussing is a great-looking tonneau-shaped field watch with a 33mm case size. The dial is absolutely classic field watch in aesthetic. It has a triangle at the 12 o'clock, Arabic numerals for all other hours, the minute hand is pencil-shaped, and the hour hand is sort of a blend of sword and pencil. It widens from its base and then has a point at the very end. The seconds hand is a nice-looking needle shape. It has vintage proportions. It is actually really rare to see a modern watch at this size. Being a tonneau shape, I would imagine that it would actually wear a little bit larger than it appears on paper. And it is powered by Hamilton's amazing H50, which boasts 80 hours of power reserve. I've experienced this movement and it truly is amazing. You can wind it up, put it on a shelf for a few days, and when you come back it's still running. The size is perfect, the aesthetic is brilliant, the water resistance isn't too bad. I feel like the Khaki Field could take some pointers from this watch. At least you could up the water resistance. The one downside I see with this watch is its crystal. It's mineral. And that is actually somewhat baffling. At nearly $900, why would you offer your customers mineral? Why wouldn't you go with acrylic or sapphire? But then again, Hamilton does do this to their customers with the Ventura at nearly $1,000. As for the specifications on this watch, the case size is 33 millimeters, the case material is stainless steel, the lug width is 18 millimeters, the lug to lug is 36 millimeters, the crystal is mineral, the water resistance is 100 meters, and the movement inside the watch is the H50. Next up we have the Marathon GPQ Steel, which retails for about $600. These watches take their inspiration from a watch produced in the 1980s, the GG-W-113. These also share a similar case shape to the CWC G10, however these watches are at a more modern 39 millimeters in case size. Interestingly, they have very narrow lugs at 16 millimeters. They feature syringe hands for the hour and minutes, and the hands feature tritium lume, so they will glow non-stop for about 25 years before it is down to 1/4 of its original brightness. Some people complain about tritium not being as bright as standard lume. However, owning the G-SAR for a while, that lume was actually pretty bright. And I mean, it glows and glows and glows. Marathon watches are absolute tanks, and it's kind of fun having a radiation symbol on the dial of your watch. But rest assured, unless you open the watch and break one of the tritium tubes and breathe it in, the tritium is harmless. I really should add another tritium loomed watch to my collection at some point. As for the specifications on these watches, the case size is 39mm, the case material is 316L steel, the lug width is 16mm, the crystal is sapphire, the water resistance is 50 meters, the movement inside these watches is an ETA F06 quartz. The next watch on my list is a Boulder Venture Carbon Black, and these retail for about $300. This piece is one of the more unique watches on this list. It has a dark colored titanium case with a crown at the 4 o'clock position. There are large Arabic indicators for the hours and small Arabics calling out the military hours, 13 through 24, just inside those indices. The hands are syringe-shaped for the hours and minutes. The seconds hand has a great-looking rectangle near its tip. This is loomed and done in an orange color. There's a minutes track of short batten markers around the edge of the dial, with dot indices at the hours positions. The case has bevels along its sides, and there's an angled bezel leading up to the flat crystal. I haven't experienced Boulder watches in person, but they seem to be absolute tanks. As for the specifications on these watches, the case size is 38mm, the case material is titanium, the lug width is 20mm, the crystal is sapphire, the water resistance is 200 meters, and the movements inside these watches is an SII NH35A. And the last watch on my list is a Merci X Hodinkee watch, which retails for about $530. This is one of the most stylish looking watches on this list. The case has a nice curve to it. The light gray dial with white details looks so great. The hours are called out in raised Arabic numerals. There's no date window, and there's a minutes track of small batten markers around the edge of the dial. The hands are blue colored sticks, and the seconds hand is a needle shape done in white. The case appears to be bead blasted. The crown is somewhat shallow, but appears to have great knurling on it, so gripping it shouldn't be a problem. The font used on these watches is Helvetica, which is a great minimalistic font. Sadly, they have 19mm lugs, so strap options are a bit limited due to the odd lug width. Strangely enough, the site doesn't mention the watch's water resistance. As for the specifications on these watches, the case size is 38mm, the case height is 11mm, the case material is stainless steel, the lug width is 19mm, the crystal is acrylic, the water resistance is unknown, the movement inside these watches is an ETA 2801-2. So if you're like me, you have an affinity for field watches, and here are 6 watches for you to consider if you haven't already heard of them when you're out hunting for a field watch. It is such a great looking aesthetic, especially when summertime rolls around and you dust off your Hawaiian shirts or short sleeve t-shirts. They just look great. Thanks for watching.